Coming up in this Fincast, I'll take you along as I create an aquascaped 55-gallon aquarium involving at least 2 styles of aquascaping all in one tank. Aquascapers are fond of saying what a challenge it is to work with one of these 55-gallon tanks. They're very popular in the United States. So here is my effort to overcome those challenges. So I got to say the fish tank doesn't look like much right now, but I do have a plan for it. I've been kind of sitting with it for a week. And what I wanted was, I've never done the iwagumi style. If you're an aquascaper, that's a pretty common term, but basically you use an odd number of rocks. You want to have a big rock and then one that is slightly smaller, leaning away, and then these other rocks sort of complete that. For rocks, I chose some that I found in the woods around my home in Virginia. I had a big rock that I wanted to use as the primary rock in my aquascape. That's known as the Oyashi, which is supposed to be the most beautiful and dominant in the iwagumi style. Now, this particular rock has what I think is a lot of quartz in it. So I needed some other rocks that were the same color and makeup. That's part of the style, is that all the rocks need to be similar in nature. So the second largest rock is known as the Fukushi, and I actually found that on a hike and carried it out of the woods in my backpack. And then from there I found some other rocks while hiking, and one in my backyard. And I haven't seen any other aquascapes done with these whitish rocks, but it does make me feel good to use rocks that I found myself as opposed to buying them in the store. And I got to admit that when I look at the aquarium, it reminds me of my time in the woods, which is a big part of my life when I'm not aquascaping. And as I was placing the rocks, I have to say I could not wait to add the substrate and then to begin planting to see how the scape would look. I've already got in quarantine a whole group of rummy-nosed tetras that I think will swim right out through the open water, and they'll be really, really interesting. But that really only takes up half the tank. But I just don't have the discipline to do just one style of planting, or really to just have one kind of fish in the fish tank. So the other half of the tank would be for fish that pretty much appreciate cover. And I think I want to make a go of it with driftwood on this side of the aquarium. And I pulled out some driftwood from some of my older tanks, and I'm going to see what I can do with that. I'm outside working with my driftwood from previous aquariums, and I'm actually working on the side of my kayak. I decided that this piece is really top notch. It's just got a lot of character. It's got the holes. It's heavy. I can't remember what type of driftwood it is, but it's one of the ones that always sinks. And so I've used a zip tie here to attach that. And I'll cut that off, and then I'm thinking I'll tuck a plant in there, and I'll tuck a plant in there and there, and I can, or some moss, but I can hide it. And then what I'm going to try and do is make this go over here like that, and that should give me some height. I've also got these 3 old pieces I'm trying to figure out. I like it when the fish swim through and around them, so I'm thinking maybe something like that. A little work to do. All right, so here's what I've come up with out in the yard. Who knows what this will look like in the fish tank, but I've got the 2 pieces connected right there. That piece obviously is not connected, nor is this one, which will stand up in the gravel. And then I managed to cobble something together with these, and I'm not sure how that's going to go in the fish tank, I'm thinking kind of like that. And I'm going to want it to be maybe more towards the front. And then, of course, I don't like these zip ties, but the idea will be to put plants in there or moss and make them go away. All right, those were some pleasant snips. Let's hope it lasts. Back inside, the aquarium just didn't look like much. I had kept the sand from a previous African cichlid setup as a base layer and added some mostly depleted sea chem fluorite from a very old planted tank that had done very well, but it was just a mix of old substrate. I placed the driftwood mostly as I had envisioned it outside, used that big showpiece to create a bit of a terrace, and then added the other taller pieces behind it, again planning to cover them with moss and plants. And then I added a full bag of fluval stratum as a top layer of substrate. I've had good luck with it in my other aquascape. And once I did that, the rocky iwagumi section started to look the way I envisioned it, and that was very pleasing. I feel like I need a few more rocks. You're supposed to have an odd number of rocks, and in this case that would mean an odd number of white rocks, which this one over here actually isn't, the one on the back, as the rest of them are. So I'm thinking maybe I need some work right in here. Let's see what that looks like. So I gathered some more white rocks and I messed around with them and tried various things until it sort of came together in my mind the way I was thinking. I needed to leave room for the planting, but I also wanted the rock formation to look like a proper iwagumi style. And the driftwood side immediately felt the way I'd hoped it would look. And what I'm really hoping for this to become is sort of that jungle where some of the fish can hide, maybe some of the dwarf cichlids that I'm planning to put in here. So open water space, jungle space, something in between. And I've bought some plants and I'm ready to get started. I am kind of nervous because I know what I want it to look like in my mind, but I don't really know if I'm going to be able to make that concept come to fruition, both in terms of figuring out which plants go where, but also then once the plants are planted, can I maintain the aquarium and have them grow in the way that I want, and then trim and prune and then stock the fish and have them be appropriate as well. So that's the great thing about aquariums, because it's so multifaceted, but it's also wonderful. It's just, I just love it so much. It just makes it really, just makes it a challenge, but it's a beautiful challenge. And I'm always kind of, even when I'm riding my bike, I'm out there trying to compose what this is going to look like. So let's get started and let's do some planting. I had already planted 2 Anubias that were left over from another project. And as planned, they helped me to hide the zip ties and just gave me a little bit of green while I was waiting to get the rest of the aquarium going. I used micro sword to begin the scape around the rocks. I'd bought a number of pots and was surprised to notice that I had actually purchased two varieties. One was the Braziliensis variety, and the other was the narrowleaf moriatis. Both require a lot of light, from what I've researched, but the moriatis, I hope I'm saying that right, is smaller, so I put that in the foreground. Then I planted the Braziliensis across the back and on the sides. In the very front, I planted Dwarf Hairgrass, but once again I discovered I had bought two varieties, Eleocharis and parvula. The parvula stays shorter, so again I put that in front of the taller Eleocharis. Hairgrass is easy to divide into small clusters, and eventually it should fill in the gaps and form a nice carpet in the front with, again, CO2 and lots of light. I would not call dwarf hairgrass an easy plant, but it does look great around the rocks, and I'm really hoping that it takes off and I get the effect that I want. This is a really fun part of the project. There's no need to hurry in order to be finished. And after thinking about how this was going to look for a few weeks, it's when you really want to be present and enjoying the process and being in the moment. It requires just enough of my attention that my mind isn't drifting off and thinking about any issues at work or any other problems I might have. You're just focused at this point on planting the aquarium and the gratification that will come from preparing and planting and now doing. Next, I planted several bunches of tissue-cultured Lobelia cardinalis, which should grow into a nice mid-ground plant. I then attached two pieces of bulbitis to the driftwood, and the plan is for that to help create my jungle effect on the left-hand side of the tank. I may need to add more later, as the two plants that I had didn't go very far. I did find that Gorilla Glue has a new container that comes with a brush, which made it much easier to apply it exactly where I want it. And then I've got one more plant to plant today. It's a tall stem plant, wisteria, and I put the water in the aquarium so that I can actually see how it's going to fill in those spaces. So we'll do that right now. I left it tall to help me visualize the finished look in the background, but eventually I plan to trim it back and give myself some more stems. While I waited for more plants to arrive from mail order, I raided some dwarf baby tears that were getting tall and leggy in another tank. These I placed in the foreground of one of the rocks in what I'm calling the transition area in the middle of the aquarium. Finally, a week late, my large order of plants arrived in the mail. There was a combination of tissue culture plants, Anubias, some Java fern, and a variety of potted crypts. I drained the aquarium, using the opportunity also to get rid of a lot of the detritus that had settled on the driftwood and the rocks. It looked like kind of like underwater dust. The Alternanthera rennicki, or AR as people call it. Nice cups, I think I'll keep those. And one of the things I've learned from a little bit from experience and a little bit from watching aquarium videos on YouTube is that with these tissue culture plants, after you get the gelatin off the bottom, what you wind up with is a lot more plants than in a potted plant. So for instance, that right there is one stem, and I probably, if I needed to, could break that into two. So there's one, and there's still a whole lot more in there. Trying not to beat them up too much. A lot of leaves coming off. Just get all of that gel off the bottom. So they call this AR, and it's supposed to be pretty easy to grow without CO2 or high lighting, but if you want that nice red color, you probably want to fuss over it a little bit more. What a nice splash of red. That's going to be in a mostly green aquascape. Pretty excited because I've already ordered my fish, and they're going to arrive in a couple of days. I'll probably quarantine them for a bit, but I've got a batch of rummy nose tetras that I'll be putting in the aquarium that have already been quarantined for 2 to 3 weeks, and they're looking great. AR is supposed to be one of the easier red plants to use in an aquascape. This is my first time trying it, and I planted it in the transition area in the middle of the tank, and then put a little over in the far left-hand side of what I'm thinking of as the jungle. And this should be a great contrast to the green plants surrounding it. Up next is the Starging repens. Love this stuff. It's just a great little, think of it like a shrubby plant. Nice foreground plant. And I've got lots of places to put that. Using a slightly different tweezers on this side. They're a little sturdier. Thought that might work better for the fact that these don't have the established root structures. It's working out okay. Some videos, the plant is storaging repens. Some people call it storaging. I've been watching a channel called Green Aqua, which is, those guys are fantastic. They do show caliber tanks. They call it storaging. Hope I'm saying that right, but when you see other people talk about it, they call it by the other name, the second half of the name, repens. So I'm not sure which is right, not sure it really matters, but got a pretty good amount of that. But this is going to be a lot of my foreground plant, and a little bit of it's going to wind up in the iwagumi scape.
After that, I added some Cryptocorini Wentai bronze. These are perfect for that transition area. And I separated the bunches a bit to create more stems. They are now taller from being grown in the immersed state prior to me buying them. But now that they are submersed as opposed to immersed, the leaf shape is expected to change and they should be a little bit lower growing. Can't wait to see how all that turns out. Up next, the Cryptocorini parva is a nice low-growing foreground plant that does well in the shade, and I wanted to use it to fill in around the shadowed edges.
Now we have some Java Fern, 2 bunches. I don't think I'm going to break those up. Very good. And some Anubias.
It was time to do the epiphyte plants. They're those that are not buried in the substrate. They prefer to be attached to rocks and driftwood. And I had several forms of Anubias and some medium-sized Java Fern. Wherever I could, I poked the Anubias into crooks in the rocks and the driftwood. I also glued 2 plants onto smaller rocks using super glue, and this makes it super easy to then place them wherever you want in the aquascape. I made a note to myself that I need to do more of this. The Java Ferns did require some more super glue and help to bring the aquascape a little higher in the aquarium.
Okay, so that's been about a 2-hour session of planting. We kind of had the grassy side already done, but I put some repens over there just to break that up just a little bit.
filled in my transition area the way I'm hoping that it's going to look. Do I get the water in and things start growing? You never know. And then over here, I think the jungle is starting to look like a jungle. And when I add some of the fish that like to hide, I hope they can find a place. So I'm feeling really good. I feel like Christmas came early, and now it's just a matter of putting some water in it and just sitting with it for a couple of days. And then we'll add some fish. And of course, you won't have to wait, but I will wait probably 2 or 3 weeks to let this grow in, and then you'll see what it looks like at the end of this video. Hope you've enjoyed it so far. By the way, I hope you're enjoying the channel. Please take the time to like and subscribe and to share it on your social media. I really appreciate it.
A few days later, it was time to add some fish. I brought in that group of rummy-nosed tetras that had been cooling their fins in another aquarium. I also bought a dozen Amano shrimp. I also bought a single but pricey zebra Otocinclus catfish. The zebra is somewhat rare, and I've never actually seen one in person before. The patterns on the side just really spoke to me, and I thought, you know, that would be just a nice fish to be a bit of a standout in this fish tank. Everything settled in quickly, and I was eagerly anticipating that school of rummies moving through the plants and then the open areas of the aquascape on what I'm calling that iwagumi side of the fish tank, and they just did not disappoint me. They stayed together in a nice school. After a few days, the colors came through with bright red noses and checkerboard tails, and the rummies just were really putting on a show. I honestly don't know a lot about keeping shrimp. I've tried it a few times and done a couple of videos, but I kind of got bored and didn't have a great deal of success. But the Amanos are supposed to stay on top of the algae problems if you have any, just a good cleanup crew. And I've just always thought it would be cool to see shrimp working the tanks in and among the fish. And these took the aquarium very quickly. They were eating immediately, and I'm enjoying watching them and really hoping my water parameters, which I'm managing mostly for the plants and for the fish, are to the liking of the shrimp over the long term. Lots of people keep them with fish and in planted aquariums, so I'm hoping that that will be somewhat of an automatic. And then the little Otto cat is very striking with that zebra pattern, and it's also feeling right at home among the plants and the wood and the rocks, and just is a very industrious little guy. About a week later, a few more fish arrived. These included a group of Corydoras pilatus and some tiny checkerboard cichlids, which were basically in awful shape when they arrived, and then also 3 Apistogramma agassizi double red males, which I'm hoping will be the stars of the aquarium. And I also purchased some Telanthera stem plants. Wanted to fill in some of the areas where the other plants hadn't grown in yet, and I also figured that if they were fast growing like stem plants often are, that they would help outcompete the algae, because the faster the plants are growing, the more they're using up all the nutrients, and therefore the nutrients are not available to any algae. So I planted some of those. And at this point, the aquarium is running without CO2.
but I have been dosing Seachem XL as a carbon source and fertilizing with Seachem Flourish, and so far everything is pretty happy. All right, now back to the fish. Couldn't wait to add the apistos and the cory cats, thinking that they would be filling in some of the spaces not being used by the rummies. Of course, the cories on the bottom of the fish tank, in and out of the plants and along the bottom, and the apistos and checkerboards exploring in and around the rocks and the roots and the plants. And everything went well, save for the checkerboards, of which only 2 survived, and they're very active, and I think that they will stick. But several days later, this aquarium is just beginning to feel like I envisioned. The plants are growing, the fish are filling in all the various parts of the ecosystem, if you will, that I had envisioned. I should also mention that speaking of fish, I picked up a gold tetra and a random neon. Both of these were sort of leftovers in our holding facility, and they're just like some nice little one-offs. I think that they believe that they are rummy nose tetras because they pretty much school with them. Also, by the way, I failed to realize early on that Telanthera are the same plant as the Alternathera renicky, and of course I'd already added several bunches of them as tissue culture plants. They right now are much redder and lower growing, but they've only been in the aquarium for a few weeks, so we'll see what happens as they get older. I expect I'll need to do a lot of trimming if they get as large as the stem plants that I just added. And I'll probably be dosing some iron in order to keep them as red as possible. So there's a look at the aquarium to date, and if you are patient, I will wait a couple more weeks and show you sort of the quote-unquote final project after everything grows in and gets acclimated just a little bit more, and we'll take a look at the final project. But here's just a few seconds of it as it stands right now. It's now been about 7 weeks since I began this project, and I wanted to add some new fish. And so I had the chance to pick up some relatively rare Hemiotis red-tailed tetras. These are about twice the length of the rummy nose tetras, and I wanted to see how they would look among the plants and give the tank maybe a little bit different look from the standard feel of the rummies and the neons and the smaller tetras. So I added those, and I also chose 2 Siamese algae eaters, a trio of albino bristlenose plecos, and 3 otto cats. And I just felt like, of course, the tank had to have an angelfish. So I chose one that had lighter colors so it wouldn't blend in with the black background, and that's turned out to be pretty smart. I really can't believe how much the aquarium has grown in. It's doing really well. I'm very excited about it. I was going to add CO2 to the tank. That's been my plan all along, and I might still, but so far I've only been dosing, they're not a sponsor, but Seachem XL and some liquid fertilizer, sort of an all-in-one fertilizer, and everything is going really, really well. So far with the fish, I did lose one of the apistogrammas. I'm not sure what happened. One day I came in, he was hiding in the corner, and then after a couple of days it disappeared. It might have been aggression, but I never saw any between the 3, and I never see any between the 2 I have left. The other thing I want to talk about is the wisteria, the water wisteria. All of these right here are cuttings that I took from the original plants, and you can see that
It's going crazy over here. I've got the jungle effect that I wanted, but I think I'm going to have to cut it back again and just sort of keep it at bay. The Hemiotis tetras are said to be skittish. I didn't know a lot about them, so I've been doing some reading, and they really were. I mean, even compared to any fish that's introduced to a new aquarium, they seem like they were scared of their shadow. But after a few days, they've really gotten acclimated. These are really cool fish. I ordered 6 and only 2 survived shipping, but even the 2 stay together all the time. They're supposed to be a schooling fish, and I was wondering, I'm kind of surprised that with only 2 of them that they're doing that schooling behavior, but so far they have. And they've really started to eat, and they're very comfortable in the aquarium. One thing I've noticed is that all of the fish spend most of their time out in the open in the rocky side. They don't spend much time in the densely planted part of the tank, and I'm not sure if they just feel comfortable because they know they can go there, or whether they just don't like it, and maybe that was something that I shouldn't have done. But I probably will open it up a little bit just to see. I should also mention the Amano shrimp have gotten really big, and they're doing a great job keeping the aquarium clean. Most of the original plants survived, though the tissue culture Telanthera, they're living, but they're not thriving. The stem versions are doing much better, and the tissue culture Lobelia cardinalis pretty much didn't survive at all, and I have no idea why, because that's supposed to be a fairly easy and hardy plant. And then the bulbitis is barely hanging on, and I suspect that I may have let it get too dry during planting. I did spray it quite often, but the bulbitis is not thriving in this aquarium. Meanwhile, the glossostigma, which I thought was going to be difficult because I don't have CO2, it's filled in, it's spreading way better than I anticipated, and so I'm just going to let that go and see what happens. I had expected the microsword plants around the rocks to spread faster than they did, so I just got impatient and added a few more clumps behind the rocks. You start out with an empty tank and you say, I'm going to start this project, this aquascape. I've got this idea in my head. So you get the rocks, the substrate, you form a plan, you buy the plants, and you start putting it all together. And then you wait. You wait for the plants to grow, you wait to see what happens, and it's a learning process, at least for me. Some plants grow and some, unfortunately, melt away. And then there are the fish, right? You want to create a world where everything is living in harmony. The fish with one another and with the plants, the rocks, and the driftwood. So I try to find a balance. I look for some open water swimmers, some bottom dwellers, and fish like the apistogrammas, which just always seem to be investigating. And of course, there's the cleanup crew, including, in my case, the Amano shrimp. Yes, you begin a project and you progress, but are you ever really done?